in the heart of vibrant New York City, where skyscrapers stretched upward like giant fingers, touching the gray, overcast clouds, Alex Thompson lived a life as neatly arranged as the appointments in his brown leather notebook. As a young psychotherapist, only 32 years old, Alex had built a small but reputable practice in Manhattan. Each day he received a stream of patients, exhausted executives worn down by work pressure, housewives drowning in loneliness amid the crowds, and young people lost in the labyrinth of social media. They came to him carrying invisible burdens, chronic anxiety, simmering depression, and a sense of isolation like being trapped in an invisible glass cage. Alex, with his Harvard degree and training in psychoanalysis, believed his mission was to help them adapt. Society is a complex system, he often told his patients, and we just need to adjust to fit in, repairing the cracks in our souls to make life more normal. But what is normal? That question sometimes lingered in Alex's mind, especially on late evenings when he sat alone in his office, gazing at the bustling crowds below. He had read Freud as a student, captivated by the idea of the unconscious, a vast ocean where repressed desires rose like waves. Jung introduced him to the shadow and archetypes, elements that helped people confront their darker selves. His therapy was based on that, listening, analyzing dreams, and gradually helping patients restructure their perceptions to cope with the outside world. However, deep down, Alex felt an emptiness. The sessions seemed to only patch the surface, returning patients to the societal grind without truly freeing them from their fundamental fear, the fear of the solitary existence of the self. One autumn afternoon that year, as torrential rain poured over the city, turning streets into shimmering rivers under neon lights, Alex sat flipping through a stack of old books left by a patient as a thank-you gift. Amid volumes on cognitive behavioral therapy and dream analysis, he happened upon a thin, worn book with the title Psychotherapy East and West by Alan Watts. The yellowed pages, printed in the 1960s, emitted a musty scent of time. Alex opened it, and his world began to change. Watts wrote about the strange similarities between Western psychotherapy and Eastern paths to spiritual liberation. Freud and Jung, in exploring the unconscious, were like Eastern explorers delving into ignorance, avidya, to attain wisdom, prajna. Both aimed to change perception, not to adapt to society, but to see through the illusion of a separate, isolated self. Alex read with his heart pounding. Maya, Watts explained, was not the material world dismissed as illusion as many misunderstood, but the system of social conventions, rules, language and roles that humans impose on themselves, creating the self as an entity separate from the universe. Buddhism and Taoism teach that this self is an illusion, a product of culture, and liberation is realizing unity. Humans are not strangers in the world, but part of a vast field where everything connects like threads in the cosmic fabric. Alex paused, looking out the window where the rain continued unabated. He thought of his patients, a middle-aged man always anxious about his career, seeing himself as the center of a survival battle. Alex's therapy helped him adapt, but according to Watts, that only reinforced the illusion. The East, with Vedanta and yoga, viewed normal society as a form of pathology, where people are trapped in cycles of desire and fear. True liberation wasn't adjustment to fit in, but transcendence, achieving spontaneity and harmony, where the self dissolves into the flow of the universe without losing individual uniqueness. Watts compared it. Just as in psychoanalysis, patients confront the unconscious for freedom. In Taoism, effortless action, Wu Wei, allows people to live like flowing water, without resistance. A tremor spread through Alex's body. He realized his work, though meaningful, was only patching the surface of a deeper issue. If the West focuses on repairing the self, he whispered, the East teaches to see through it as a social game. The idea of East-West synthesis flashed in his mind, a therapy that not only heals but liberates, turning perception into spiritual yoga. Alex stood up, turned off the office light and stepped out into the rain. He decided to begin his journey, leaving the familiarity of the city, seeking gurus, books, and perhaps himself, in the unity between two worlds. That night, under the hazy streetlights, Alex felt a spark of hope, not hope for adaptation, but for true liberation. Alex stepped out of the office, his trench coat soaked under the relentless New York rain. The city seemed more alive than ever. The blaring car horns, the rushing crowds with their black umbrellas and neon lights reflecting on the glistening pavement. He wandered aimlessly, his mind still lingering on Watt's words. "Society is a communication system," he muttered, recalling the chapter he'd read. "It creates the isolated self, and that's what leads to neurosis." Alex decided not to go home right away. Instead, he ducked into a small coffee shop in Greenwich Village, where artists and philosophers often gathered. The place was crowded, the aroma of roasted coffee mingling with cigarette smoke, and lively chatter filled the air. Sitting in a corner, Alex observed the people. Next to him was a young couple. The girl was describing her office job with a weary look, while the guy nodded, eyes glued to his phone. "I have to try harder to advance," she said. "But why do I feel so lost?" The guy replied, "That's life. Everyone has to compete to survive." Alex smiled bitterly. This was the double bind Watts described, the double contradiction of society. It demands independence and self-reliance, but simultaneously requires conformity and blending into the crowd. The result, neurosis spreading like a silent epidemic. He thought of his patients. They weren't truly patients, but victims of a normal yet pathological society. He ordered an espresso and continued reading Watts. This chapter delved into society and sanity. Watts argued that the separate self is an illusion created by society through language and conventions. Games that we play so seriously, we forget they're just games. The survival instinct, Watts wrote, isn't natural instinct but a societal projection turning life into an endless battle. Alex looked up, scanning the cafe. Everyone here seemed to be acting in a play. The waiter smiling politely despite fatigue, customers debating politics with feigned enthusiasm, and all trying to adapt to avoid being eliminated from the game. But according to the East, samsara, the cycle of suffering, is when we take this game seriously. Nirvana isn't escape, but recognizing the game and playing it with joy without attachment. An elderly man with a white beard sat at the next table and struck up a conversation. He introduced himself as Ilyas, a former sociology professor who had traveled through India and China. "Reading Watts? Good stuff," he said, eyes twinkling. "Western society teaches us to be sane by following norms, but those norms are the source of illness." Elias shared his journey. In India, he witnessed sadhus, ascetics, living on society's fringes, unbound by roles, and they seemed saner than anyone he'd met. They see through social conventions, money, status, even the self, as illusions. They don't destroy them. They play along without being controlled. Alex listened, his heart racing. He shared about his work, how he helped patients adapt to society. Elias laughed heartily. Adapt to what? Normal society is a giant double bind. It says be yourself, but punishes you if you're not like everyone else. The result is widespread neurosis, anxiety, depression, isolation. The East teaches that true sanity is seeing through this game. Life is Leela, a cosmic play, not a serious survival problem. They talked late into the night, Elias sketching diagrams on napkins, society as a communication network, where the self is a fabricated knot. Liberation, he said, is untying the knot without cutting the thread. When the cafe closed, Alex left with his mind reeling. He walked along the Hudson River, the cold wind whipping his face. Thesity now looked different, no longer a familiar place, but a giant stage where everyone performed roles unknowingly. He realized normal didn't mean sane. Society had made us all ill by turning the game into a burden. Watts and Elias had opened his eyes. To truly help patients, he must help them see through social conventions, play the game with freedom, without fear. But the journey had just begun. Alex paused on the bridge, gazing at the dark water flowing to the sea. If society is illusion, he thought, where does liberation lie? After the conversation with Elias by the Hudson River, Alex couldn't sleep peacefully. Ideas about double binds and social games swirled in his head like a storm. The next morning, he cancelled all patient appointments, citing an emergency rest. Instead, he bought a plane ticket to San Francisco, the city Elias suggested, where Eastern communities were flourishing with meditation centers and workshops on Asian philosophy. "Go," Elias had said before parting, "find a real guru." Not to learn formulas, but to experience paths to liberation. Alex boarded the plane with Watt's book in hand, opening to the next chapter, The Ways of Liberation. The flight was long, but Alex immersed himself in the pages. Watts described Eastern methods as paths to liberation, not superstitious religions, but akin to psychotherapy. Buddhism with prajna, wisdom seeing through reality, resembled psychoanalysis delving into the unconscious to overcome neurosis. Taoism emphasized wu-wei, effortless action like water flowing with the terrain without resistance. Alex smiled as Watts compared wu-wei to Carl Rogers' non-directive therapy. The guru doesn't impose solutions, but lets the student realize illusions through skillful dialogue. The guru uses spiritual judo, Watts wrote, leveraging the student's own efforts to flip them, revealing the self as illusion. He thought of his patients. If he applied this, instead of guiding, he could let them discover ignorance, avidya, leading to realizing the world as dharmadhatu, a unified field where everything connects like a cosmic web. Arriving in San Francisco, Alex rented an old car and drove to Big Sur, where a Buddhist monastery nestled among pine forests and cliffs overlooking the Pacific. The air here was unlike New York, salty sea breeze, the rhythmic crash of waves, and a silence that made him feel small. He joined a meditation retreat led by a teacher named Rinchen, a tall, thin Tibetan man with eyes bright as if knowing all secrets. Rinchen didn't give long lectures. Instead, he started with simple questions. Who are you? Not your name, job, but truly who? Alex stammered about his work life, but Rinchen shook his head. That's social roles. Look deeper. In the following days, Alex learned about pathsto liberation. Rinchen explained reincarnation not as literal rebirth, but a metaphor for cycles of suffering caused by ignorance, like repeating neurosis in psychology. Miracles or supernatural powers were symbols, not reality. Liberation is seeing through avidya, he said, realizing the self doesn't exist separately. The world is a field where your actions affect all and all affect you. They practiced vipassana meditation, sitting still, observing breath, letting thoughts pass like clouds. Alex initially resisted, his mind full of worries about the clinic left behind, but gradually he felt wu-wei, spontaneous action, without control. One afternoon on the cliffside, Rinchen used the judo Watts described. Alex complained about isolation. I feel like an island in the sea. Rinchen smiled, then try to isolate more. Try not to think of the sea, not to feel the wind, not to hear the waves. Alex tried, but the more he did, the more he realized the impossibility. Wind still brushed his skin. Waves echoed, and his body blended with the environment. See, Rinchen said, the isolated self is illusion. You are part of the field, dharmadhatu. Liberation is realizing that, not fighting. Alex was stunned. He thought of his therapy. Hafton guided patients to cope with the outside world, but according to the East there is no true outside. Vedanta teaches Atman, true self is Brahman, universe, like Jung's unity with the collective unconscious. Yoga is practiced to experience that unity through body and breath. Psychotherapy can learn from this, Alex whispered. Instead of repairing the self, help it dissolve into the flow. The days in Big Sur changed him. He began seeing life not as a problem to solve, but a game to join with compassion. When the retreat ended, Alex drove back to Thessaly full of hope. He had experienced paths to liberation, not mere theory but through practice. But he knew the journey wasn't over. There was more to explore in East-West synthesis. Stopping the car by the roadside, watching the sunset dye the ocean red, Alex wondered, what will perception after liberation be like? After the meditation days in Big Sur, Alex felt like a new person, or at least a less bound version of himself. He drove along the California coast, the salty sea wind blowing through the open window, carrying the sound of crashing waves and the smell of seaweed. The sunset painted the horizon red, and he stopped in a small coastal town called Carmel. Here, with its quaint wooden houses and art galleries, it seemed the ideal place to reflect on what he'd learned. Alex rented a room overlooking the sea and opened Watt's book to the next chapter. Through a glass darkly, quoted from the Bible, implying hazy perception of reality. Watts wrote about perception after liberation. The self isn't a fixed entity, but social hypnosis, an illusion created through language and conventions. The external world isn't a separate enemy, but a mirror of the self. Like in Vedanta, Atman and Brahman are one. Alex sat on the balcony, watching the rolling waves. He recalled Rinchen. Your perception is clouded by duality, subject and object, self and world. Watts critiqued Freud and Jung for reinforcing that duality. Freud saw the unconscious as an enemy to conquer, Jung archetypes as external forces. But the East teaches accepting emotions as part of the flow, without avoidance or suppression. The next morning, Alex wandered the town and happened upon Maya, a middle-aged painter with disheveled silver hair and deep eyes. She was painting by the shore, bold strokes recreating the waves and sky. "Your painting is beautiful," Alex said, stopping to watch. Maya admitted, "Beautiful? It's just a reflection. I paint not to recreate the world, but to see myself in it." They talked, and Alex shared his journey. Maya, who had studied Eastern philosophy in India, nodded. Watts is right. Our perception is through a dark glass, distorted by the social self. Liberation is wiping that glass clean, seeing the world as your mirror. Maya invited him to her studio, a wooden house filled with paintings and old books. There she explained Sahaja, unattached natural love like breathing. The West fears emotions, she said. Freud teaches repressing desires, but Taoism teaches letting them flow freely, without control. Science does the same, analyzing the world as separate objects. But it needs yoga to experience unity. Alex thought of his patients. He had helped them cope with existential anxiety through reason. But according to Watts, that anxiety stems from duality, separating life and death, self and other. Liberation brings eros, life energy accepting death as sleep, leading to sahaja love, loving without possession. They painted a picture together, Alex clumsily holding the brush, trying to depict the sea waves. "Don't try," Maya said. "Let your hand flow with emotion." At first he resisted, fearing to ruin the canvas, but gradually he let go. The strokes became spontaneous, and the painting emerged not as separate waves, but a unified field blending sea, sky, and himself. "See?" Maya laughed. "The world is a mirror. Your emotions reflect in it. There's no subject painting and object painted. All is one." Alex felt a tremor. Perception after liberation isn't perfect clarity, but accepting the haze as part of unity. Existential anxiety dissolved as he saw death not as end, but rhythm of the cosmic field. That evening, by a beach bonfire, Maya shared her journey. Once severely depressed, she sought Western therapy but found it temporary. Then the East taught her to see through social hypnosis, the self-ASA product of conventions, not real. Watts is right. Psychotherapy needs yoga for perception, she said. Transcend duality, achieve sahaja, live with unbound love. Alex nodded, feeling relieved. He had looked through the dark glass and seen clearer. The world wasn't a stranger, but an extension of himself. Parting with Maya, Alex continued driving, his mind full of contemplation. This new perception changed everything. His therapy had to change. But what risks lay in this game? After the days by the sea in Carmel with Maya, Alex continued driving along the Pacific Coast Highway, its dramatic curves hugging cliffs and the vast ocean. The sea wind swept away chaotic thoughts, but he still felt a vague unease. The new perception from the previous chapter, seeing the world through a dark glass and realizing unity, brought peace. But Watts warned of risks. Therapy, East or West, could become a counter-game, a counter-proposal creating new double binds. Alex stopped at a viewpoint near Monterey, where waves crashed in white foam on rocks. He opened the book to Chapter 5, The Counter-Game. Watts critiqued psychotherapy as a game like Guru Student, where the doctor might unwittingly create double binds if turning therapy into a power struggle. The boundary between body and environment isn't clear. They are shared, a continuous field. Psychiatric progress leads to humility, but also the loneliness of liberation. Realizing the self is illusion, one might feel adrift. Watts warned against arbitrarily identifying behavior with the self or environment, as that only reinforces illusion. Alex sat on a rock outcrop, watching dolphins leap in the distance. He reflected on his journey, from bustling New York to serene Big Sur, then artistic Carmel. But was he playing a counter-game with himself? The East-West synthesis sounded great, but if applied wrong, patients could get more stuck. A middle-aged woman in hiking gear stopped nearby. She introduced herself as Lena, a retired psychiatrist who had studied Bateson and Watts. "You look deep in thought," she said, sitting beside him. "Reading Watts? This chapter is good, but dangerous." They talked under the afternoon sun. Lena shared her career. She once used therapy to heal patients, but realized it often created new double binds, patients becoming dependent on the doctor like a guru, instead of self-liberating. The body environment. Boundary is shared, she explained, drawing a circle in the sand. Your body ends at the skin, but breath merges with air. Actions affect the environment. Liberation is realizing that, but if the guru abuses it, the game becomes a trap. Alex shared his experiences with Rinchen and Maya. Lena nodded. Progress brings humility. You see yourself small in the cosmic field. But loneliness follows. When the self dissolves, you're adrift among crowds still playing the game seriously. They strolled along the beach, Lena pointing out shells washed by waves. Behavior isn't of the self or of the environment separately, she said. Avoid arbitrary assignments, that's countergame. For example, in therapy, if you tell patients it's society's fault, they might blame instead of acting spontaneously. Alex felt it sink in. He had done that with patients, reinforcing victimhood instead of liberation. Lena shared a case. A patient of hers, after East-West therapy, achieved humility but fell into loneliness, feeling disconnected. Liberation isn't isolation, she emphasized. It leads to compassion, because you see all as one. That evening they sat by a bonfire Lena kindled. She played harmonica, blues melodies blending with waves. Alex tried applying it. He confessed his fear that this journey was just a counter-game escaping reality. Lena used judo. Then try escaping more. Try not to think of patience, not to feel the sea wind. Alex laughed, realizing the impossibility. Thoughts came anyway, wind blew. See? Counter-game is resisting the game itself. Liberation is playing without getting trapped. He grasped the risks. Therapy could create new traps, but with awareness, it becomes a true tool. Parting with Lena, Alex drove into the night, headlights illuminating the winding road. He had learned about countergame, the risks of therapy, blurred boundaries, and loneliness accompanying humility. The journey was deeper now, but he was ready to face it. What new ethics awaited at the end? After the encounter with Lena by the Monterey shore, Alex drove through the night southward, headlights slicing through the darkness of the coastal highway. The night wind carried salt and pine scents, and he felt the journey reaching its climax. Watts' chapters had guided him from bustling New York to California's hidden corners, from theory to experience. Now, the final chapter, the art of psychoanalysis, or ethics of Eros, concluding with a proposal for a new ethics, living based on life energy, Eros rather than coercive reason, accepting life as spontaneous dance. Alex stopped in Los Angeles, the city glittering like an artificial sea of stars. He rented a room in an old hotel near Hollywood, where dreams and illusions intertwined. The next morning, he wandered the streets, observing the crowds, aspiring actors, hustling entrepreneurs, and homeless people on the sidewalks. Watts critiqued Western culture for viewing work as a burden due to fear of death, turning life into a survival war instead of a joyful game. Ethic of Eros, Watts wrote, is living with life energy, accepting death as part of the rhythm, leading to true freedom. Non-existence is the only way to exist. He ducked into a jazz bar in downtown, where live music echoed with melancholic saxophone notes. There he met Julian, a tall black musician with a warm smile and a voice deep like bass. Julian was playing piano, fingers gliding spontaneously, not following a fixed score. Music is Eros, Julian said during a break sitting with Alex, not reason but flow. Watts is right. The West fears death, turning life into drudgery. Alex shared his journey, from Western therapy to Eastern liberation, from double-bind to countergame. Julian nodded. Synthesize them. Therapy should be art, like jazz, spontaneous, wu-wei. accepting mistakes as part of the tune. They talked late. Julian shared his life. Once addicted, he sought therapy but found it temporary. Then he discovered Taoism through Watts, learning to live as Eros, joyful life energy unbound by norms. Fear of death makes us see work as burden, he said, but Eros teaches acceptance. Live like dancing, die like sleep. Unattached love, compassion spreads because all is one field. Alex thought of his patients. He could turn therapy into art of psychoanalysis, not repairing but awakening Eros, helping them live freely, transcending East-West duality. That evening, Julian invited him to an underground performance in an old warehouse. The crowd gathered, jazz blending with free dance. Alex joined, initially hesitant, but gradually let go. His body moved to the rhythm, without thought. "This is Ethic of Eros," Julian shouted over the music. "Live joyfully, don't serious-eyes the game." Alex sensed the synthesis, the East more like therapy than religion, the West needing the East for true freedom. He saw his patients in the crowd, lost souls now dancing with the universe. When the party ended, Alex left with peace. The journey concluded here. From isolated self to unified field, from neurosis to eros. He would return to New York, transforming his practice into a place of liberation, yoga for perception, ethic of Eros for life. Stopping the car by Malibu Beach, watching the sunrise, Alex whispered, "Thank you, Watts. Life is a dance, not a burden."